don't know how much time I have. I am honestly not sure if this will even make it out, but I'm gonna try. I have to. Not just to save what's left of my soul, but to warn as many people as possible. They have to know what's coming, how to avoid it, and who's responsible. I know I'm just a voice, a nobody shouting into the depths of the internet. I don't expect anyone to believe me. But if only even a few listen, those are lives saved from a terrible fate. To that end, I'll disclose some very sensitive information. You see, my name is, well, that's not important anymore. Chances are my personal records have already been erased. So for now, just call me Morris. I was a researcher for the CIA. I worked for a division called the Advanced Intelligence Extrapolation Protocols. If you try to look it up, don't bother. You won't find it. Not even in the deepest, darkest parts of the deep web. Hell, just saying it out loud has already sealed my death warrant. That's how serious it is. What they do, it ties directly into my expertise. Before I joined the agency, I was your typical overachieving academic. Just picture the nerdiest grade grubber you knew from school, then make him a few inches taller, give him an obsessive personality, and remove all semblance of self-awareness. That's me. Coming from a working-class family, I needed that to get anywhere in life. My parents had no money. The town I grew up in had nothing going for it. I had to get out, and in college was the only path for me. So that's what I did. I skipped a couple grades levels in high school, got accepted into an Ivy League school, but since Ivy League schools are expensive, I couldn't pay my way through, even with a scholarship. So I looked for other options, and that's how the CIA found me. What they offered was better than any loan, grant, or aid package. In exchange for working part-time as a junior analyst, they'd pay for all my expenses. Room, board, books, computers, hell, even new clothes. They paid for it all. And all I had to do was help them analyze data. They never specified what kind of data it was, and since this was the CIA, I wasn't inclined to ask questions. I just saw an opportunity to pay for college without washing dishes, so I took it. Now, I was fully aware this is hardly your typical summer job. But I wasn't among those who bought into conspiracy theories and hidden agendas. I just saw the CIA as another government agency. And for the first few years, that's exactly what they were. During the school year, I'd go to class like anyone else. And during the summer, I'd work at some remote office for the CIA. But trust me, it's not as glamorous as it sounds. I wasn't some fancy agent in a black suit with dark sunglasses. I was just another brainy college kid sitting in a cubicle, going over large swaths of data and trying to make sense of it all. It may not sound like much, but it played to my strengths. Because beyond just being smart, I am obsessive when it comes to interpreting data. Seriously, I could spend days on end staring at a computer screen, recognizing patterns, and extrapolating information. Especially the kind that involves behavioral trends. And I was good at it too. So good, in fact, I got tapped for another opportunity. They called it Project Siren. Not the most menacing name, but fitting for reasons that'll soon become painfully clear. It's something they'd been working on since the early 2000s. But they'd recently made a few breakthroughs and were ready to take it to the next level. The underlying goal of the program was simple and tactical. Find new, more effective ways of interrogating people. All those messy, enhanced interrogation techniques you've heard about, they're plenty bad, and they give the CIA an ugly reputation. But honestly, they could care less about that. They just wanted something that worked better. And since I was studying neuroscience, I was in a position to help. At first, I didn't even know I was helping, but it was largely through my work that they eventually got what they needed. At first, I just analyzed data on brain scans, PET scans, and other psychological screenings. Basically, turning all that data into a workable model of sorts. See, a lot of stuff goes into the brain of someone who's being interrogated, even more so when they're being tortured. But even when someone is beaten, broken down, and tormented, their psyche often finds a way to adapt. But I developed a model that predicted there was a certain point where someone, anyone, could just be utterly broken. And the people at Project Sign were very eager to test that theory, so they made me a new offer. Not only would they pay for the rest of my college, they would give me a full-time job at the agency, complete with benefits, bonuses, and a complete lack of restrictions on research. I'm ashamed to say it was that last part that really sold me. And once I got that in writing, I took a year-long sabbatical from school to help the CIA turn my work into a functional tool. It was honestly exciting, so much so that I didn't mind the secrecy and screening that followed. I let them create a cover for my absence, one they gave to my family so that they wouldn't ask questions. I also let them relocate me to some remote facility in the Midwest. I honestly don't know which state it was in. I just know that I had to be blindfolded during the flight. And I don't like flying to begin with, so it was more than a little stressful. But once we arrived, the stress became an afterthought. I doubt this will surprise anyone, but the CIA has some incredible resources. The kind you'll never find in a less secretive lab. I mean, some of the equipment they had there looked like it came from the future. Being an eager science nerd, I was in heaven. I couldn't start working fast enough. The next 7 months just passed in a blur. I spent upwards of 20 hours in the lab nonstop, crunching numbers and running simulations. I was so focused, never stopping to think of what my work would achieve. I was actively working on something that would utterly break the human psyche, and for the CIA no less. I know that sounds bad, but I just kept telling myself that this would allow for better interrogations, the kind that didn't even require torture. For someone who's supposed to be smart, I can't believe I was so foolish. I'm sick to my stomach just thinking about it. Oh, it doesn't matter how much I regret it now. All that matters is I succeeded. I took my data on breaking the human psyche, and I fed it into one of the CIA's most advanced computers. They actually didn't even tell me how powerful it was. They just said it was this level of AI that no one else had access to. I didn't care for the specifics. I just needed it to turn my data into something we could test. Took a lot of number crunching and adjustments, but in the end, we still got what we needed. All that was necessary was a test subject and a mechanism. Getting the test subject was the easy part. The CIA took care of that for me, and I was not inclined to ask questions. Creating the mechanism took a bit more effort. Wasn't exactly fancy. My team and I ended up jerry-rigging an old pair of stereo headphones with a neurostimulator. The same kind hospital use in deep brain stimulation. I'm kind of hesitant to describe it, picture something that looks like a bike helmet with a set of oversized headphones taped to the side. But it didn't need to look stylish, it just had to stimulate the brain in a very particular way. And we wouldn't know the full extent of its impact until we tested it. I was expecting something profound, but oh my God, nothing could have prepared me for what happened. On the day of the test, I had a front row seat. I sat in a small gallery with several high-ranking officers and the deputy director. The agency prepared a special interrogation room, not unlike the ones you'd see at a police station. Through a one-way mirror, we could see an oversized chair with restraints and one unlucky volunteer strapped to it. I don't know much about the volunteer. They didn't give me his name. They just said he's the kind of guy you shouldn't feel sorry for. I will say he certainly looked tough. He stood at least 6.5 feet tall with the build of a linebacker. And he also had these dark, penetrating eyes. A kind that made clear that he was a hardened soul. This was not the kind of man who would break easily, if at all. He was so intimidating that I worried about the results. I thought this might be too much for a first test for a first prototype, but it was too late to turn back. Once the man was strapped in, the test proceeded. He put the device on his head, the guards cleared the room. Then, from the same room I was in, an officer flipped a switch. And what happened next has haunted my dreams ever since. From our end, we didn't hear much, just this low, distinct humming noise. But for the test subject, well, I don't know what he heard. I just know what it did to him. Initially, he just cringed, like he'd been shocked by a taser or burned by a sharp knife to the gut. Then he started thrashing violently, so much so that some of the restraints started to fail. The man yelled and screamed at the top of his lungs, as though someone were injecting fire directly into his brain. That alone made me feel queasy, but for the hardened CIA types, I'm sure they'd seen worse. But then, something else happened. Something more disturbing than any pain scream. This man, this big, tough, hardened man, started crying. It caught us all by surprise. One second, he was yelling like he was being tortured, and the next, he was bawling his eyes out. Tears just poured out of his eyes like a pipe had just burst. They streamed down his face so much that they soaked the top part of his shirt. I didn't even know it was possible to shed that many tears. This went on and on for a good 15 minutes, but the guy just didn't stop crying. He cried so hard that his face turned blood red. Every muscle above the neck tensed and cramped. But that still wasn't the worst part. Before his voice gave out, one of the officers ordered that the device be turned off. The tech guy on hand did it immediately, but the man kept crying. At first we thought something had gone wrong. I got up and ordered they kill the power to the device. One officer protested, but the deputy director overruled him. And it still didn't stop. The man kept crying and bawling. It got so bad that his vitals started crashing. A couple of paramedics burst into the room. All of us still watching in the gallery, mind you. They undid the restraints and removed the device. But it was no use. The man continued crying. He cried so much that he became severely dehydrated. All those tears just added up too quickly. They tried to sedate him. They tried to hook him to an IV. But it was too late. Before he passed out, he looked up at the one-way mirror. I swear to God, he was looking right at me, as though he knew on some level that this was my doing. And that's when he uttered his final, raspy words.
No hope, only sorrow.
Finally, he stopped crying. The man's mind and body just gave out after that. His eyes slammed shut. He exhaled one last time, and he fell dead on the spot. The paramedics tried to revive him, but it was no use. First test was complete, and the first test subject was dead. It took all my strength, and then some, to stop myself from throwing up. But everyone else in the room, who I imagine had seen their share of torture victims, were unfazed. Some were disturbed by how quickly the man broke, but they were not at all dissuaded. In fact, some were enthralled. Everyone got in line to shake my hand, not noticing how sick I felt at that moment. I honestly didn't know how I did it. I just managed to smile and nod. These men began talking about all the intel they would get from this. They claimed it would save countless lives. Some of those men are dead now, and I can't say I feel too sorry for them, but because what happened next, well, it's their fault as much as mine. They called it the Great Sorrow, and the device that caused it, the inducer. And they demanded that I refine both, make it so that it would break someone without killing them, or at the very least, leave them unbroken long enough to spew some valuable intelligence. Despite my disgust, I thought I could refine the process enough to make the Great Sorrow non-lethal. Again, I was wrong. I should have realized that then, but even if I had, it was too late. The CIA was invested, and they already had me in a remote lab. I wasn't getting out there until the work was done. That much they made clear. I didn't have a choice, but I didn't put up a fight either. I just buried myself in my work, crunching numbers, configuring the inducer, and refining my theories. I spent no less than 22 hours a day uploading data into the CIA's advanced computers, not giving much thought to what would emerge. My obsessive nature drove me, but more suffered because of it. With each adjustment to the inducer, we had to run more tests. That meant putting more unwitting test subjects through the Great Sorrow. They always came in looking so tough and hardened. I suspect most of them came from top-level prisons, some of which weren't on American soil, mind you. I still made it a point not to ask questions or learn their names, but still, it didn't change the outcome. We'd put them in a room, we'd strap them to the device, and they'd just immediately start wailing and crying in despair. And they ultimately perished, but not before uttering those last haunting words.
No hope, only sorrow.
I wish I could say I grew numb to it, but you just can't get used to certain things. Seeing people cry and bawl themselves to death is a special kind of horror. Even some hardened military types couldn't handle it. Even so, it still wasn't enough to pull the plug. Eventually, they started getting impatient with me. But no matter what I did, they couldn't control the effects. We tried hooking subjects up to IVs and pumping them full of sedatives. That didn't work. Subjects either died from the sedatives or from the sorrow. We tried tempering the level of brain stimulation caused by the inducer, hoping to minimize the impact. But it didn't change a damn thing. The subjects still cried themselves to death. And ironically, all this testing only made us more efficient at killing them with sorrow. And by tempering the effect, we were able to create more inducers, hoping in vain that one of them might work. It eventually got to a point where we could induce the Great Sorrow with a simple pair of headphones, not like the ones you'd probably have for your smartphone. But at that point, after God knows how many test subjects, I finally voiced my concerns. I told one of the top geniers that this was getting dangerous. We didn't entirely understand what the AI was doing with my data, and in its current form, you could, in theory, transmit the signal to anyone with a phone. And they too would be hit with the Great Sorrow. The general assured me that they'd beef up security, but he didn't hide his frustration. The CIA still wanted to turn this monstrosity into a weapon. The fact it became so dangerous only raised the stakes even more. He urged me to figure it out. Oh, I should have quit on the spot. Hell, I should have set fire to that entire facility and burned it to the ground. That would have ended this madness. But I didn't. I was a fool and a coward. So I just kept working, still thinking I could find a way to fix all this. But that delusion finally ended the day I got a fateful error. Remember, I'd been relying on the CIA's advanced AI to crunch all the data and extrapolate my theories. But on that one fateful day, I uploaded all the latest data from the test subjects, something I'd done many times before without issue, and suddenly, I got this blaring message on the main computer screen.
Error. No hope. Only sorrow. Error.
Seeing that message sent a chill down my spine. I had to blink a few times, foolishly hoping that this was a nightmare I could wake up from. But it was real. This advanced AI, the AI that had turned my theories into this horror, blared this ominous error, displaying to me the same words that every test subject had uttered before their death. And keep in mind, these systems are CIA. They're not supposed to get errors. They're supposed to be too advanced for that. When I saw those words, I knew I had finally gone too far. Maybe I overloaded it with too much test data. Maybe this was just some immutable barrier, nature's way of letting us know that we'd reached a point of no return. Whatever it was, I knew I had to stop this. I had to put an end to I had to end Project Siren completely. I ran to the nearest officer in a panic. I grabbed him by the collar and urged him to kill the power to the labs. He thought I'd lost my mind. He pushed me away and slammed me against a nearby wall. He then got on his communicator to reach his superior. But that's when I heard it. That low-level hum that had accompanied every test subject. Immediately, I covered my ears with both hands. That probably saved my life. Because when I turned around and looked at the officer, his expression immediately changed. He'd held this communicator up to his ear for no more than 10 seconds. Then, like all the other test subjects before him, he started crying uncontrollably. Eventually, he fell to the floor and sobbed until he died right there in front of me. At that moment, I quickly made the connection. The error in that AI. It must have corrupted the whole system. Now it was broadcasting the great sorrow in all directions. Be it a phone, a radio, or even an old speaker system. It was now transmitting this ungodly signal. Knowing the implications, I got up and ran. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me through that facility. I kept yelling at the top of my lungs, urging everyone to throw away their devices and cover their ears. But it was too late. Everywhere I turned, I saw it. Men and women, hardened soldiers and officers, writhing on the floor, crying themselves to death. Yeah, it didn't matter if they were janitors or 4-star generals. They all succumbed, saying those same haunting words.
No hope. Only sorrow.
I still don't know how I managed to get out. By the time I got outside, I think everyone in the facility was dead. I hoped the signal would stop there, but those hopes were quickly dashed. He was already transmitting. I ran by cars and vehicles with people sitting in the driver's seats, crying like there was no tomorrow. Some were already dead, hunched over the steering wheel. I saw more than one vehicle crash because of it. Eventually, I found an old Jeep with a busted radio. It had keys in it, and I didn't have time to ask for permission. I just took it, and I started driving. I've been on the run ever since. I have no idea how far that signal has gone, or how many more have been affected. Maybe it was just restricted to that facility. Maybe it's been transmitting everywhere. I'm too afraid to check the news feeds, online or otherwise. In that time, I've formulated a theory of sorts about the Great Sorrow, if only to distract myself from the carnage I've unleashed. The CIA thought it was just a side effect of breaking someone's psyche. I admit that was my initial conclusion. But now, I think it's something much worse than that. This signal, what it does to a mind, well, it doesn't actually cause great pain. It really doesn't have to. All it has to do is adjusts how the brain interprets the world around it in a small but critical way. You see, the human brain isn't wired to see things objectively and truthfully. Any first-year neuroscience student will tell you that. It's just supposed to process the world in whatever way keeps you alive. The Great Sorrow, it's not a state that's induced. It's a realization, this signal. I believe it causes us to see the world and ourselves in its truest, clearest form. And that form is, as evidenced by the final words, devoid of all hope and utterly awash with sorrow. That world has always been there. That truth has always been there. The Great Sorrow, it just reveals it to us. And our only reaction, it seems, is to cry ourselves to death. That's how bad it is. Whether I'm right or wrong about this, it no longer matters. I really don't know how long it's been, and I don't know how much longer I have. I'm at the end of the road, literally and figuratively. I had to ditch the Jeep, and I've thrown away my wallet, my phone, everything that runs on electricity. This statement, this final confession, is probably the last thing I'll get out. Either the CIA will come for me, or the Great Sorrow will find me. No matter what happens, I'm done for. But now you know my story. Now you know what's coming. You can save yourself. So please, if you're hearing this message right now, turn off your TV. Don't answer your phone. And if you hear that humming, that deep, distinct humming, cover your ears and run. Run before it